I'll talk about what my presentation today is going to be. Essentially, what I've divided it into various sections. I'll basically want to talk about the question of the kinds of violence that is happening, the global situation about it, because this is the violence that we are talking about, and the violence of women and children that we're talking about is not typical to India. All of us who are looking at who are working in the sector, we know that to a large extent, violence against women is not perpetrated only in India. I mean, this is a global phenomenon, and we also read reports of a lot of cases where we have seen that in many countries during times of pandemic, there are instances where violence against women does take place in a significant number. Unfortunately, one of the things which had struck the international women's movement, at least for a very long time, is that even though during the time of World War, when there was various cases of violence against women uh, that was being perpetrated. Unfortunately, at that point in time, none of the actual cases of violence were not documented. In fact, if you look into the old records of Nuremberg trial and the Tokyo trial, you would never see any case rape or any form of sexual violence being tried as a violent weapon of war, despite the fact that there were instances of sexual violence being perpetrated against a large number of women at that point in time. So it's only post the breakdown of Yugoslavia and all the Rwanda and all those war crimes. If you look at the ICT reports of those times, that is when for the first time that rape and sexual violence came to be recognized as a weapon of war. And now the UN system acknowledges that in any times of pandemic, or whether it is a man-made, whether it's a disaster, whether it's a disease, I mean, in the time that we do, there are instances. Women and children, more particularly, are more vulnerable to any forms of violence. And the fact is, they're also the people for whom response come last. So these are some of the things that one has seen during this time. Next slide, please. Yeah. With respect to the kinds of violence that women and children get subjected to in this whole place is really not different from the violence that they may be facing during a regular time, during a non-pandemic time, or a non-war time. But the fact is, yeah, thanks. I'll tell you when you have to move the slide. But the fact is that we need to look at these cases. In cases of any of these pandemics or disaster or any such thing, the number of cases actually increases. Now, unfortunately, while during the course of the research, I was looking for data, and the data did not really support the number of cases registered. Doesn't really support the statement that I'm making. But although there are a lot of anecdotal references, and one of the reasons according to me and my analysis, is that even reporting of these violence cases becomes a challenge at this time, and there is a large number of underreporting. The kind of violence that women get subjected to range from domestic, sexual, economic, digital, displacement, which we are seeing in our country, starvation, abandonment, and trafficking. And with the case of abandonment, and more in the case of children than with women. And there are also cases of abandonment is more amongst elderly women. We know of cases where sick women who are actually being ignored and left behind in the hospital to fend for themselves. And these are all various kinds of abuse and violence that are being faced. Trafficking becomes rampant, and traffickers have a field day because all attention and focus is of the entire administration is to address the pandemic and the resultant things that are required to be attended to. So when with resources being diverted, it becomes easier for people to access the vulnerable and then subject them to various forms of violence. Next slide, please. Thank you. One of the things which amongst, besides of course the various kind of violence, one of the things that also impacts that you can see, and all these are global. You may have difference in numbers, but all of them, and globally, one has seen that this is apparent. This is prevalent globally. Health takes a big impact. There's an economic impact where economic resources become scarce to the family, and consequently, economic becomes even more scarce to the women in the family. Mental health is affected to a large extent, while we have seen that men in the family have other outlets, like they take to drinking and many other things. Women, unfortunately, not being able to access the resources that they were otherwise would have accessed, are subjected to all kinds of violence within, if there may not be physical violence, there may be there will be mental abuse, and the confinement itself causes various other kinds of mental health problems to women, and they end up, women and children end up suffering far more, because in our patriarchal kind of a society, the expression of any distress to women and children are not encouraged. So when this with expression being discouraged, then the tendency to kind of internalize the whole thing becomes even more, and then they do not share, and then it kind of breaks out into some other form. And many times, if you see children behaving in a peculiar way in this time, it's because they do not have an outlet to express their frustration or any other problem that they may be emotionally facing. Many of them may not even be able to identify what they're going through, and these are some of the things, consequence of it. Basic rights are denied, and that's something we are seeing on a regular basis. Food, shelter, clothing, education, health access, nothing. Everything is completely compromised, and many of us do not have basic services. Education has completely gone. I mean, while privileged people like our children are able to access education by looking at through digital means, a large number of population who do not have access to digital means are completely denied of education. Imagine, with great difficulty, children go to school, and even greater difficulty, girl children are retained in the school, and that's what the statistics say. Our government statistics say that. And in this time, so imagine from the month of March till now, and we don't know for how long schools are shut. So how are people and how are children able to access? And the kind of children we're talking about are, as it is, much behind with respect to other children of their ages who have better facilities. And so how will they cope up eventually when they come out and try to go to school whenever that is, maybe in a few months from now, maybe next year? And education takes a big hit. Exposure to abuse is also another serious consequence of this, because when you get exposed if you're already vulnerable, for example, I mean, this is something supported by a UN study, a UN Women study, as well as the WHO study, which actually says that when you already have a difficult situation at home, if you already have a conflict situation at home, it gets exacerbated in this time, because there's a constant exposure to people who are the perpetrator and the victim. When this constant exposure will let the victim have even more experiences of violence. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, this is a recent WHO report. Now, between March, April, and in 2020, WHO, UN Women, many other UN agencies brought out, I think even UNICEF, they brought out multiple papers, which kind of basically fact sheets which came out, which was documenting violence. Of course, these are all reported cases and information that they got, and that itself is a little scary. For example, WHO says there is an increase globally. There's an increase in cases of domestic violence. They talk about China, Europe, many parts of Europe, and in the United States. And this is something I'm quoting from the report. This is not this is not something that this is just a quote from the report. They talk about one police station had the number of cases had increased by 3 times. The similar figures from Europe and United States. Child pornographic views of increase, and that is something also typical to India. Even within India, you can see the number of hits on child pornography has increased significantly. And the news reports said that the viewing from India have also significantly increased. Next slide, please. This is a 2020 report of the Executive Director of the UN Women. This was released in April, first week of April 2020, and that's what she said in her. So in Argentina, Canada, France, Germany, Spain, this is basically repeating what I said in my previous slide. It's only to reinforce that the fact that the entire UN system has also been absorbing a significant and a gradual increase of number of cases of violence against women and the increased requests for help. Next slide, please. Before I get into this whole digital thing, I just want to share something with all of us. If you look, if you were to remember, if you're following news on violence against women and children more, if you were to look at it, sometime in March and in early April, the Supreme Court of India passed a set of guidelines related to prisons, because they were their concern, and legitimate and rightly so. The concern was about addressing how do we deal with this crowding? There's already overcrowding in prisons. How do we deal with the COVID-19 within the prisons? How do we make sure that the prisoners don't get impacted by this disease? So at that time, they had passed a series of directions with respect to releasing prisoners who were in jail, and there were some terms and conditions laid down, and there were also some criteria laid out. Soon thereafter, the National Children's Commission came out with an advisory. And in that advisory, they actually talked about also applying the same Supreme Court judgment to children in conflict with the law who were in various shelter homes, who were in various homes because they were detained there as they were found to be, or they were being tried as children in conflict with the law. Unfortunately, what I've seen in my experience, and when one had been reading reports, that children were then being sent away from these shelters, and then but the way in which now while the intention was good and the intention of the advisory was to give the same benefit to the children as the benefit that was being extended to adults, but unfortunately it was not mindful of one serious fact, because a large number of children who are actually in these homes and who are found to be in these homes may not necessarily have families. And many of the cases that people working with children will acknowledge is that many times when people come to access the children, they are not necessarily their guardians, and they are not necessarily people who are looking at their best interests. So unfortunately, an arbitrary release of children had happened, and that exposed them to further other abuse. Now, while it is not documented, while one doesn't know what is happening, and field research, unfortunately, in this time is not being very, rampant, and people are not able to access information in the field, it does cause a serious concern to all of us that children have been sent and one doesn't know in what condition they have been sent to. And was it a good idea to send these children away? Now, coming back to this, continuing with my current presentation, now, as I was saying earlier, in addition to physical violence and other forms of violence that women and children are subjected to, digital violence have also increased, and this digital violence have taken various forms. Now, while digital violence against women may have some forms like stalking, sexual violence, and other things, with respect to children, what we have seen is bullying has increased. And there are instances. Just this morning, I was listening to another a speaker on talking about cybercrime and how cybercrime has been increasing. What people are talking about, even abuse in the virtual chat rooms. That one now currently, when the one we are engaged in, Zoom came to a lot of criticism because people were able to easily hack into and enter chat rooms. And then there are instances where school teachers have shared that during the course of their classes, when they were actually trying to conduct the classes, they were unsolicited participants in that, and then subsequently bullying cases. They engaged with the children. In addition to that, we have cases of bullying which have also increased. Now, one of the things that was being shared was that because of the digital need to expose children to digital media through their classrooms, it's also giving them access to the internet, and it is also giving them access to internet in an unsupervised manner. Because at that particular point in time when they're engaged in the classes, one is not, the adult supervision is not there, and one is not sure about, as to children, whether they're actually is engaging themselves in the classroom, or they're navigating to other sites and exposing themselves to other vulnerability. Next slide, please. One of the things which in the beginning, what I talked about was with respect to health. Now, health impact on women during this pandemic is something. It has kind of a diverse kind of a system. On the one hand, we have generally women's health being ignored because of the social system that we have, and also with respect to women not sharing with many of their health issues, thinking that it is part of their life and part of their livelihood, and that's how it's going to be. And in addition to that, today, because of the constant demand for for sanitary needs, where you find the need to have increased water, increased quantities of water, we see a lot of them actually having access to more water. And in our system, what we have seen is that the women are the ones who are actually reaching out to get water. And in the process of getting out, when they do not have water supplies within their homes, the exposure to the all other infections that increases. In addition to that, which we have seen, if you have even in a middle class and lower middle class, upper middle class family, if there's a single transport available within the family, it is normally accessed by the man, and that makes women even more vulnerable to access transport. And in Africa, one of the countries, during Ebola time, one had seen that there are more women who died of obstetric complications than the disease itself. And similarly, I mean, such reports will hopefully will not come, but then one wouldn't be surprised if those reports come out in India as well. Adolescent pregnancy rate increase also in Africa. And these are all reports of the WHO. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, sorry, thank you. In addition to that, besides, of course, water, there's also a larger role that women play in collecting food and for feeding their families. And invariably, what one has seen is that even in any situation, the primary onus of providing food is kind of fixed on the woman of the family. And in view of that, she's to source the food. She steps out and then gets exposed. And this is another reason why many of them are catching infection. In addition to that, we know that primary caregivers within any families, also women, at the cost of their own health, they tend to others, and that exposes them to further infections, and of course, their health gets compromised. Considering they're not able to navigate or negotiate within their own families with respect to use of having any safe practices, and are not able to access any of these contraceptives themselves because of lack of resources and lack of things being available to them, their exposure to any kind of sexual STDs increase. Next slide, please. This is talking about the same point. Now, the risks risks to women and girls and adolescent girls, especially on sexual and reproductive health, also is completely compromised because almost all the workers are diverted for COVID relief. So with basic information not being available to girls, especially in the rural areas where ASHA workers or other health workers are the only source of their information and resources to them, it has taken a significant hit. And this relates to all other services. I mean, number of calls one receives with respect to women who are not able to access any health service has significantly increased. And there's one such incident which got reported when women are actually turned away from hospitals, and there are many such incidents. There's one incident that one is quoted. There are many, and we read about it on a regular basis. That because the hospital resources are also diverted to attend to this pandemic, and because of which these basic services are being denied to women. Next slide, please. These are some of the things which had happened in in other countries during looking at the economic impact. Now, as a woman, when you're self-employed, especially, although self-employment is now being slowly open, and you're self-employed and you are actually you're working as a vendor in an informal sector, when you're when you're going out, the number of if that whole facility is denied to you, if you're not in a position to actually access that basic service that you were providing for yourself, and that compromises you. So as one has seen, our vendors and especially hawkers and many other things, women who are in that sector, have all of them been denied all their income from that, and that has impacted them a lot. And it's not, I'm just giving you other examples. You get in every pandemic, whether it's any kind of disaster, this is something which happens. And there is a kind of a pecking order that we've seen and this pecking order is it's not just prevalent just outside or at a workplace. It is there within our families, and the person who is most vulnerable gets bullied the most, and then she's always at the receiving end. And in most families, it is the women and of course children. And in any kind of economic return to employment, it is seen that the men's economic activity will definitely get a priority and a preference than to women. So then women are the last ones to get back to work. So on the one hand, at home they're being abused because they have to perform at work in the house with less resources. And when they get back to work, they're able to get back to work much later, and they'll be denied their fair wages in view of that. So in that way, they are actually suffering at both places. In addition to that, of course, unpaid care work. This is not something typical to only this situation. It is prevalent almost. It gets more reinforced in this time. Next slide, please. When we talked about sexual and in the beginning of my presentation, I brought to your attention the fact that for a long time, sexual violence was never even recognized as a consequence in any of these mass human violence and tragedies. So just that while it is now acknowledged, this is about the last 20 years, it's now 20-25 years, it's actually begun to be acknowledged, and sexual violence is taken more seriously. But the fact is that sexual violence gets so poorly reported in any kind, in a situation of epidemic. For example, when they were when in any kind of, even if you look at a parallel situation or any other situation, like for example a communal riots, when we see, when we look at those reports, what you see is the gender-based violence do not get reflected in the number as per the actual number that have taken place. While you see physical violence, otherwise which get reported in larger numbers, sexual violence, which is actually violence that women face routinely in any of these instances, but unfortunately doesn't get reported at all. And these are some of the instances which happen in Africa when there was when Ebola happened. Women were sexually assaulted, but somehow they were not. It was not documented. Similarly, there are other, when you look at the vulnerable, when in any vulnerable class, if you want to consider the poor as a vulnerable, within the poor families, the women get even more vulnerable because they are subject to vulnerability not only from society but also within the families. And that's what happens in any case of sexual violence also. While the violence faced by the family or abuse and discrimination faced by the family is kind of highlighted and talked about, the violence faced by women is not even reflected within the family itself. And when you look, and this is not confined to only wives in the family, even older women in the family, especially those who are at health risk and who are dependent on the family for any other economic needs, they get exposed even more. Women with disabilities, children with disabilities have additional risks, and children with cerebral any kind of retardation also get exposed much more in this time. One of the things that one had seen at that time, although India, luckily for us, Childline, for example, was written as essential service, and of course, Childline functioning was happening. But the fact is that the resources get scaled down. And if you have a lockdown kind of situation where all of us are asked to work at 1/3 the capacity, it's only natural that even these resource providers also work in 1/3 capacity. So when you have people working in 1/3 capacity, the outreach, the response that they can give you when for a call of crisis will obviously be compromised. In view of that, all hotlines, and this is seen globally, hotlines, crisis centers, providing of shelter, legal aid helplines, and any other services, all of them have taken a significant hit. Next slide, please. Some of the things which I just want to highlight that while there were instances of women being this were exposures, and then they were not able to access resources. The extremely sad thing which happened was this case where a health worker, supposedly this is now a case is pending, so one doesn't know what is happening, but then it was reported that a health worker had actually molested a woman who was in quarantine. But this is these are some of the things that makes them extremely vulnerable. So when you're in a healthcare situation, when you're away from family and in a situation where you're not able to actually even access the family at all, because the way in which the way in which this whole epidemic, and it is so contagious and infectious, so you are actually isolated. And when you're isolated from your primary support group, if at all, the family, it is a family, when you're isolated from them, and the person who is in charge of you, who are supposed to look after you, is aware that you're isolated and you are actually helpless at that time. And so the instance and the cases of abuse and the way in which the person can abuse also increases. And that is the Noida example is one such thing which came in the papers, and it was extremely, it was kind of scary, because if quarantine facilities are not safe, where will these women go? Next slide, please. Now, one of the things which some figures that we had collected was, of course, as I was telling you, in the beginning, that documentation itself is so poor, because people are not reporting, and even when they report, one doesn't know when response is provided for, or they are documented. These are some figures that we had got, which was released in the media. This is the only way one can access it. So this from Delhi Police, and Ghaziabad talked about some of the cases that they released. Next slide, please. Now, this is something, I'm not sure if you can see it properly. I tried to increase the size of it, but which I couldn't really do it. But I put it here because the moment you look at, I just, when I make any presentation on any subject, the first thing I do is to check actually on the mainstream media or mainstream any internet search to see what kind of hits, what kind of search, what does the search engine throw on you. So just before earlier today, maybe I think around 11:30 in the morning, I just thought, let me Google violence against women and children during Corona time or COVID time. And then I can't tell you the number of instances which came out. There was about thousands of instances. And you just have to click there to see. Almost every day there is one instance or the other, and there's documented. These are all documented instances where people have reported to somebody, and it is not just confined to any one region. I at least in this page, you see Kerala. There's Tamil Nadu. There's other things that I'm not sure we're able to see properly, but then these are some of the things that is there. And this page is kept continuing. There were so many other, almost every state, every region, there was some violence reported on a daily basis. And this is something. This is really shocking. The second thing one also saw, and this particular page is relevant to that, was also because I had read about it couple of months back, about the number of the demand for child porn has increased during this time. So this was just to look at how many cases of child pornography has been reported, and everywhere. So this again, same thing. Kerala Cyber Police has talked about it. Delhi Police talked about it. Chennai Police have talked about it. In Mumbai, it's being reported. So it's not just confined to any particular region. It's just that confinement seems to bring out all kinds of carnal, really this in people. And now you cannot say if somebody is searching it's a man or a woman, but the fact is that there's a large number of cyber porn, child porn sites that are being looked at, and it's something. It's a little scary. And this seems to be a kind of a damage, a consequence of this lockdown. Next slide, please. As I was talking to you earlier, when we talked about the situation where women get vulnerable because of the way they don't have support systems. For example, a support system, I don't necessarily mean only the families or any kind of emotional support system that one may have. I include physical support systems, like you may have transport, you may have other security measures that you have. For example, if you have a healthcare worker having to commute a distance, but because the situation currently demands it, and if she's not able to access safe transport, and this is something, it will only exaggerate and make her exposure to violence much more. And some of the things that we have talked about, and this is documented everywhere, and it's across, again, globally, is very unfortunate. Healthcare workers, especially women healthcare workers, are subject to far more violence, and we have seen that in healthcare, at least in nursing, as in nursing faculty, we have more women who are serving as nurses, and many of them are all drawn into to serve for long working hours without any break, and most of them have to commute at odd times, and all of them are subjected to all kinds of violence. And these are some of the figures we have from Nepal, Germany, and also in Africa. And this is a global phenomenon everywhere, because systems are compromised and systems are kind of reduced. Support systems are reduced and not accessible fully. Women get subjected to all kinds of violence. Next slide, please. One of the things which I talked about earlier with respect to, in addition to being subject to violence in transport, in commute, and also their odd hours and odd workplaces, and all kinds of other limitations, one has also seen that within as I was saying earlier, in every situation where a group of people can face violence, the way in which women can face violence gets exaggerated, and then women end up facing a lot of violence. For even in cases of doctors being assaulted, one will see women are being assaulted not just physically; they can also get molested. There is other kinds of violence that they do face. Next slide, please. Now, these are some examples which are there, which talked about violence against children during Zika. At that time, one saw that a large number of mothers of children who were affected by it were being subjected to all kinds of abuse. And similarly, one of the reports in India talks about there has been an increase in looking for violent content. And because people, it's in when you look at things that are viewed in the digital media, it's not necessarily they're not necessarily looking at only pornography. There are also other kinds of things, violent form that people look at. Next slide, please. As and earlier I had mentioned about education, and this is some of the things that is also consequence of this. A large number of children are currently out of school because currently out of school because they're not able to access the school. And then girls, as we have seen that the dropout rate in girls is so much higher than dropout rate among boys. Not to say the dropout rate in boys is any better. It's also very high, but adolescent girls after they attain puberty are normally discouraged from going to school. And so these figures are anyway allowed. We find that girls are not able to access schools, and in the current situation, with zero access to schools and zero access to any kind of digital media that they may have to look at to access their online classes, it becomes difficult for them to access schools, and then it also impacts them for them to continue to schools thereafter, and subsequently whenever the school resumes, for adolescent girls to get back to school, if at all they want to get back, it's the challenges within the family will be much higher. Next slide, please. There's some things that the government has put in place, and then there are many precautions that the government has been taking also from time to time. Advisories are being issued by the ministries, women's commissions, children's commissions from time to time. But unfortunately, what one has seen is the massive number of cases that are coming out is not enough. These support systems and these advisories are unable to meet with those kind of requirements. The Women's Commission's helpline, in fact, I think is overflowing. In fact, to a large extent, one doesn't know how they're being manned because there's no documentation. But the fact is now there are a large number of individuals, people who are listed on the website are getting repeated calls of domestic violence, sexual harassment, and one of the other consequences of it has also been that women who had filed these instances of domestic violence cases or sexual harassment cases or any other cases are finding that because of the fact that this outbreak in the last 3 months, everything is being delayed, and the protection that they would have got in the interim is completely compromised now. So the protection has gone. They are getting exposed to the same forms of violence or whatever kind of violence was, and they are not able to access the police services or any other protection officers in this time in any jurisdictions. Next slide, please. This is the advisory that I was talking about. Almost everyone has started providing helplines, and some of the helplines are working extremely well. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge that has happened is that the helplines are not able to cope with the traffic that is coming their way. This is another one of the underutilized helpline portal, I would say, not a helpline really, on cybercrime, and I thought that's why I'm trying to mention this, is the MHA's portal for the cybercrime.gov.in. This enables people to log complaints both by name as well as anonymous. So if you see any complaint or any instance of cyber violence against women and children, and you think you want to report and you want to report anonymously, you must report this. They also take down content immediately, and if there's you can follow up with them in case there are any instances where your content is not taken down or the content has appeared in some other portal. Anyway, I'll get into the detail after the PPT is over. I'll come back to that. And there's some other helplines. So one, it is not possible for in a presentation like this to list out all the helplines. Every state has put up a helpline. Childline is functioning throughout the country. And then so these are some of the things that is accessible. Even women's helpline 1091 is also functional. In many states, there are additional helplines that are put out, and you may want to contact them, or you can reach out to people individually later on. Next slide, please. But while these systems are put in place, and you read about how they're converting schools into quarantine centers, they're converting various other places into various other things. But something that needs to be done, and these are some of the examples. This is documented by the WHO and other reports, which I've just taken some of the relevant things from there and placed it here. Because see, one of the things that lockdown didn't prepare, and also when the lockdown came, we have many other issues with the lockdown itself, because we feel economically preparing people economically, preparing people for other kinds of things were not up to the mark. But one of the things that has been ignored and not being written about, that there are many other things which are extremely critical for women and children, which are also not taken into consideration. For example, if you have women who are being displaced, children who are lost, children who are not able to access services or any other such thing, there are not enough resources that are available. While we have physical resources available, the utilization of these resources, about how do we access the resources, how we place them, spread them out in a proper way, and have we had, are the children who are really needing these resources able to use these resources in a proper way? These are some of the things that has not taken place. Some examples are some, this talking about some initiatives of the government in various countries. They've done this, and this is not the only thing that can be done. There are various ways. But if you think, if we sit down and as a collective come up with some suggestions, and administration comes up with practical solutions, there are a lot of things that can be done. But unfortunately, we are all looking into management of COVID cases than management of people who are affected by COVID cases. And I think that is the basic problem in our intervention. Because COVID it's a disease and one doesn't know how to deal with it. We're looking at it, there may be vaccines coming, there may be medication coming. But the people affected by that also need management. They need management of various kinds. And by affecting, I don't mean only the people who have got the disease or got the infection. There are other people affected in various ways. We are affected because we are not able to work. Migrant laborers affected in a different way because they're not able to access anything. They're not even able to access their homes, shelter, food, transport, anything that they're not able to access. These are all these things which are compromised and which needs to be addressed. And all of this has to be prepared on a daily basis on the basis of the need of each thing. The need to decentralize everything and to understand in each location what is required. Next slide, please. The next slide is also some examples of what are the things that can be done. One thing that these are all suggestions which have come out in various global organizations, and many individual small global NGOs have talked about things that you should do, things that you have to have a support network. For example, if you want to have, if the government has not provided a service to you which you are not able to access, at that time you look around yourself, look around your colonies, look around your society to make sure that these services are available. And within our own colonies, we have to at least, if possible, to circulate within the colony, that if anybody is victim of domestic violence, if anybody is facing violence, they should be able to reach out. Just the way we are sharing numbers within our groups about accessing essential services, like what we call essential services. Each one's essential services may be different. We are sharing about things like a plumber, electrician, and many other things, food, and many other things. It may be also worthwhile to share that if you have anyone facing violence, either yourself or your help or anybody else in the house, or anyone you come in contact with, it's important to share these numbers. I've seen in my experience that people share animal rescue phone numbers far more easily than they're willing to share helpline numbers for women in distress, and it's extremely unfortunate. Violence failed women and children are also as important and as critical in needs intervention. But somehow within our own, somehow we are in a state of denial to think that in our colonies and our homes it doesn't happen. We also think that because it's happening in somebody else's home, it may not be my problem, so I need not intervene. Please remember that this is a time when we need to intervene. We need to step up that support. Next slide, please. These are some of the things that can be done. I don't know how much time we have. Okay, a couple of minutes more, because I wanted to say something else in addition to my PowerPoint. So I just wanted to quickly go through this. One of the things that looking at other things that I was talking about is one of the things that we need to also help for healthcare workers and other people who are exposed to work in very difficult circumstances is to provide them support system for if they're facing sexual harassment. If they're facing sexual harassment workplace, where do they go? Who do they access? And do we have enough kind of support systems for that, and putting that in place? Next slide, please. These are other steps which I was talking about, and this is repeating what I've said, so I'll quickly go through, read it quickly. Independent women's groups should, this is about, it's talking about NGOs and women's groups, and I'm saying within colonies, if you have an RWA, within RWA, form a women's RWA and give that venue, give that location for people to actually reach out, to be able to reach out in that space. I've seen that in a common group of husbands and women, men and women there, many women are not comfortable sharing their problems that they face. They're not even comfortable sharing about a problem that a neighbor is facing. And if you create an all-women's group in that kind of thing, or in an RW situation, women actually can reach out. I'm just about talking about urban women. but there may be many other similar kind of community-based support system that needs to be created in a place like this, where domestic violence can be prevented or domestic violence victims can be supported. And NCW has identified some NGOs already as support services in this time, but there may be many more who can come forward and who can be actually inducted into making sure that they help. Because many of them, we have enormous experience in dealing with violence against women in our country, and I think all of them have to be enlisted to make sure that they are able to provide these services. Next slide, please. In fact, one of the constant anxiety level I have, and I'm sure a majority of you will also have, is that this is not a finite kind of situation where we know that in the next 15 days we are fine and it'll all be over and we're all out to work and things will be how it used to be before, because we don't know how it is. Even now we are having the lockdown phases. Now we may have lockdown 4, now we may have lockdown 5, we may have lockdown 6. We don't know. We hope that it's not there, but we don't know how long they'll continue. So, all our energy, all our plans should factor that in. We'll have to factor that this may be for some times to come. This situation that of all resources not being available the way it used to be available earlier may continue for a couple of months now, or maybe a few more months than that. So what do we do in such times? How do we plan? And if your institutions, if you are making plans for intervention in women's cases and children's cases, it's important to look at that. If you're in a position to dialogue or influence any kind of the government programs, you should tell them that this is not something that can be planned in an ad hoc manner. This has to be looked at long term, and it also has to be in such a way that, God forbid, if a situation like this happens in 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we have this experience and we learn that experience and know what to do better in the next time around. And as I was saying, this pandemic is something that's happened now, caught by the entire globe by surprise. But the fact is, situations of this kind has happened in the past, or maybe a varying impact to a different degree. But the fact is, these things have taken place in the past also, and then unfortunately, we do not learn by experience. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to add a couple of things which post my presentation before we open for question and answer. Some of the things I have not shared here. There are court orders passed for children in distress and children in shelters, which I have not shared here because it was the presentation was getting too long and the order itself was extremely long and one was not in a position to share. Similarly, I have not also shared with you laws that are applicable when you want to seek redress, because I felt that will make the presentation itself in a very clinical legal presentation, which I did not want to. One of the things that I would say, parents and who are now, because parents are going to spend more time with their children within India at least, I would like that you engage with them on and have conversations with them on responsible social media usage, and also talk to them about POCSO, because sexual exposure and sexual behavior is something which happens in adolescence, which we should not run away from. And this is something that families will have to engage with children, especially boys, because the consequence of it, and the fact that if you do not talk to boys about about responsible sexual behavior on social media or on one-to-one or any other space, the consequence to the boys and the criminal exposure that they may get is extremely high. The law as it is today doesn't recognize the fact that at age 15, people are sexually active. They're exploring themselves sexually, and unfortunately, the sexual exposure engages with another girl of the same age. The children, the impact on the boy and the impact on the people who complain, and the impact on the whole family is extremely. I mean, it has long consequences for the child. And it's important that we make sure that we prevent it. And with respect to social media usage and what can be said in social media and how we can digital whole thing can be guarded, it's an important time for us to engage with our children, talk to them the consequences of it, and look at the laws, because the POCSO is an important piece of legislation that one has to look at. And I think all parents need to know what POCSO is, because it's a good law in some sense. Many of us, we are practitioners, we think that it's a good law because needed. But on the other hand, it also has a lot of consequences for young adults and also teenage children. And if parents should know about it, children should know about it, and parents should know about it in a way that they can talk to children about it. Similarly, one needs to also know about information technology law with respect to expose any kind of pornographic exposure that one may have. People are curious, children are curious, they wander off to these sites, and those are things, and they wander off to these sites, they may get exposed to a certain people who, and we know that is not, it's not anecdotal, we all know, we have instances of where people get exposed to traffickers who talk to children in these platforms and in these sites, and without realizing whom they're engaging with, children actually compromise themselves a lot. And I think perhaps it's really important that we address this and we take this time to address this. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you so much for addressing this very important issue and for giving us your insights. While you were presenting, there were a few questions that were raised by. Is my voice breaking, or is it clear?
Now it's clear. Now it's clear.
Okay, so ma'am, once again, thank you so much for your presentation and your wonderful insights. While the presentation was going on, we did have a few questions from our participants. One question is from Ms. Anushri Bernard, who's a lawyer. She says, according to data provided by the NCW, the highest number of cases of domestic violence have been in Uttarakhand, Haryana, and Delhi. These states are already struggling with a skewed sex ratio due to the practice of female feticide. And she goes on to ask, how can we help these women to get justice at the same time empower them when there are not even safe spaces or shelter homes for women in distress, especially during this lockdown?
This, as I, in fact, I mentioned, this is a challenge because this is a big challenge because all resources are now diverted to COVID relief, and many of the people are not able to access basic facilities and live along situation of this kind. But having said that, I must also say that shelters are open. There are many shelters which are open, and not to say that shelters are the best space for women to go. But at the same time, what I have seen, and I've been talking to people, and I'm encouraging people also, is that complaints which happen, and if it's a complaint of violence which a woman is facing, should actually be taken up. And it helps to have a collective or a community helping these women, because ordinarily what would happen was a woman was able to, many times if she wanted to go, if she was able to go to a location and file a complaint. Unfortunately, that whole system is now compromised. She's not able to go, she's subjected to more violence within the families. So using community, using the neighborhood, using anybody in the vicinity who can provide her support is something that we need to do. This is not a legal response, unfortunately, because the whole court system is completely, it's not available right now for anyone to use. And even the emergency services, emergency courtrooms that are sitting are not taking up cases of domestic violence in the way they would take up earlier. And in many jurisdictions, courts are not functioning at all. So given these limitations, I would say two things: help them document the whole thing so that they can, eventually they can file a case. The second thing I would also encourage everyone, and I think, I'm encouraging, I don't see it applies to others, it applies to me as well, is to look at within the community how we can have a support network for women in distress, and bring in that support to those women. Yeah, that's okay.
Also, I would like to ask you whether you think that domestic abuse would also lead to sex-selective abortions, especially in relation to the government, suspending some of the provisions of the PCP NDT rules recently.
You see, they've always been correlated. And we know that the whole sex selection, the whole process, ultrasound, that whole thing, all that happened because of male preference. And then male preference do happens in families, which, I mean, the very fact that there's male preference, that is reflecting the fact that they do not look, I mean, their opinion about women, the way they would treat their women in those families are questionable. So they're all interconnected. We can't isolate one with the other. And unfortunately, this COVID has exposed us in a way, because we think everything else, probably our administration is thinking that others can be temporarily compromised. But what we seem to forget is the fact that those things which were prevalent earlier, like male preference and a tendency to abuse women, tendency to abuse children, that will not go away just because we happen to be in a situation, the pandemic is prevalent. So suspending, and not just, you are talking about PCP and DTN, but there are also many other legislations where there's a lot of compromise, where there's a lot of dilution that is happening, in labor laws, many other things that you see that there are lots of being diluted. And it is going to have significant negative bearing on women and children, and on as well as sex selection.
Right. The next question is from Mr. Rajan Shah, who's asking whether you could explain the increase in trafficking, whether you could elaborate on increase of trafficking due to the pandemic.
Okay. You see, as I said that in the beginning itself, there is as of now, the data that is available to us is not adequate at all, because there is no figures are not being captured in a way they ought to, for various reasons you are very obvious. But my experience in my experience, what I've seen is, in any situation where there is any kind of a breakdown of our of all our services and all our routine routine livelihood options, the vulnerable become more vulnerable. And the traffickers end up in these situations. They are able to target people easily because the attention of the entire society is diverted elsewhere. And I'll give an example of any kind of disaster which has happened, where you have a large women families which are dying, families which are displaced, families which are moving away because they have to be displaced. In those situations where if children are being left out, if women are being left out, the tendency to take them away, offering them enticing them to provide some services is also higher. Similarly, when you have cases of people not having no work at all, in such situations, many of them ending up, or many of them negotiating to work at a far more lower wage than they're entitled to, is also, it is very apparent. So you will have cases of increase in bonded labor. You will have cases of increase in sex, people being trafficked for sex. You will have cases of women and children being trafficked for other things. So number of trafficking will increase, because, as I was saying, the administration and the entire social system, our social fragment is now diverted to attend to something else. So traffickers take advantage of that, and this is one of those cases where traffickers can easily access the children. With respect to accessing children, and children especially digitally, it's much more easier now, because children have access to the internet now, because families are giving them access to the internet, and children are, many teachers say that while during the class they wander off into looking into other sites. Families say that they wander off looking into other sites. The moment they go into other sites, the way in which the traffickers prey upon them and kind of entice them into getting trafficked, engage them into various other things that they are not supposed to be doing, pornography and grooming. These are all some of the things which is going to happen. And so that's how the case of trafficking will increase.
We have a comment from Tahmina Arora, the director of EDF India, who says that there is also added vulnerability of women of minority communities due to intersection of their faith, identities, and gender. Would you like to add to that?
I will say to what I don't disagree with her at all. I've maintained that thread throughout my presentation, is that in any situation of this kind, the vulnerable become more vulnerable. So they were already vulnerable. It is not as if their vulnerability was was not known. They were very vulnerable. So just the way we know that women are vulnerable to domestic violence, women from minority communities have various other vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. The vulnerability gets exaggerated in this time. That's what is happening. and so they whatever they were vulnerable for, it only gets multiplied many fold.
A very common question is how do we protect women from the poorer communities, women and children of the poorer communities, and how do they get immediate help when faced with domestic violence?
I said this was actually similar to the first question that you had asked me, one somebody had put out, and you see, I can only as a practitioner and as a practitioner of law and as working with women and children, this is something I can say that when support services which are otherwise available are compromised, are reduced, it's important for us to make sure that we build within ourselves our own support services. I would encourage all of us to strengthen support services that we can build within our own community. I think that's the only way we can address it this time, because I'll give you an example. 2 days back, I got a call from a woman who said she's a victim of sexual harassment and her case has been going on for some time, and she had got some police protection. And now there is compromise because the police are not giving protection anymore. And the person is now back to harming her, and which he was not able to do about 3-4 months back. And this is one such case which came to my notice, or one such case will come to many other, to the notice of people who are in a position to provide any service. There'll be many more cases where the interim protection that they would have got of various kinds, in fact, through various fora, would now be compromised, would be taken away. And the person who was a perpetrator there will be aware of it. So it's important for us to, while we are, many of us have come forward and provided food to the vulnerable, it's also important for us to come forward and provide these services also, help services to women who may be subject to domestic violence or other forms of violence against women, violence within their families.
A very interesting question from a law student, Natasha Martin. She asks, why are women's problems often joined up with children's problem? Why don't women have their own identity without being a mother, wife, etc.?
Okay, let me answer to you from another point of view. I'm a child rights lawyer, and for many years I used to constantly tell that I don't want to be taken as a woman and child. When I would be introduced, I would be told this is Aparna, but represent women and children. I would say no, I represent only children. And so the value, yeah, it's not about identity. After practicing in this sector for many years, it's not identity, it's intertwined. The problems are common many times, and so it is not as if when you talk women and children, you are kind of compromising or diminishing or trivializing women's identity and her rights. It's about just handling these two together. And if you look at children's problems, if you look at the way children's problems are handled, the access children have for resources, the violence that children are faced to, children end up facing, it's proportionately much higher. But to answer your question, that I don't think just when you put women and children together, you're trivializing women or children. You are dealing with both of them, and some problems are common, so we're dealing with all of them. It's like saying that when you talk about when you talk about women in minority women, why are you talking about minority women? Why not minorities? Are we trivializing minorities? And it's not that way. It's just to put them. It's just to deal with problems. The problems which are common to both of them.
Another question from Lalta Fali. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. The question is, how can we deal with parents who send their daughters who are minors as domestic helps to different metropolitan areas?
You see, child labor, domestic child labor is something that that's a huge discussion because people have different opinions about it. Many of us, anyway, coming to that. You see, all these questions have a legal answer. As a lawyer, I can tell you that, okay, go and file a case, file a police complaint, file that, go to child welfare committee. I can say all this. But as a practitioner and having worked with families and with children, many times I know that is not the solution that may work best. Because if families send children and you go to the police, and the police arrest the father in the family or the mother in the family, it is not really providing any support to that girl. The girl and it gets more vulnerable. I'm not for a moment saying that I support or endorse what the family is doing, but I'm talking about the legal remedies that are so limiting. You know, the remedies available to the family and the child are so limiting. It really compromises, or it kind of it gives very few options to the family. Answering your question about how can we stop, I think the only way we can stop is constant advocacy and education. And this is the only thing that has worked everywhere. That the only way families will stop, and also educating and making the mother economically independent. And here I'm to answer the law student again. I'm not bringing in the woman as a mother and kind of compromising the woman's rights. But what one has seen is where the mother is empowered, the mother has access to economic resources, and she has autonomy over the resources. The child having access to education is higher, and this is the only way. This is the only way I think one can stop them from sending children. Because if we engage with them, and you kind of, in one instances they are able to stop them, the traffickers are far more clever and have better access than us, and they do not have the limitation of ethics that we seem to have. So they will compromise and they will bully them in various ways to make sure the child is sent. So we should be mindful of that. And also at the end of the day, the family looks at it as one more bread earner. No? They look at it as one more source of income for them. It may not really eventually work out that way, but that's what they think. And so this has to be, and so if we are going to be attacking that, we need to engage with them and we need to make the discourse that far more, viable and viable to them. And that's the only way we can work with them and stop it.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a question from Advocate Javan Patankar. He asks, while courts in India are determining what cases are extremely urgent cases, do you think domestic violence cases could satisfy the test? And a follow-up to that is also, what are the provisions under which the offender can immediately be arrested and a complaint be drafted accordingly in order to provide security to the victim?
This goes from case to case. I can't give a straitjacket answer, and you can't have a common answer to all kinds of cases. But the fact is, courts are deciding extremely urgent cases. It is true. And unfortunately, domestic violence cases, I think, although are very urgent and critical, because a woman's life is in danger at that point in time, safety and security of women is in danger. Unfortunately, in many jurisdictions, they were not taken as an emergency cases. But I think it's an emergency case. If a woman is going to be deprived of her home, her children, her access to any resources, it's a question of her human right and her basic rights that are being compromised. So it is of extreme urgency. It's of extreme urgency, but somehow many courts have not seen it as extreme urgent, and that's very unfortunate.
A question from Advocate Balakrishnan Bhaskaran. He says, in states like Bihar, where the sale of alcohol is banned, does it lead to reduction in the instances of domestic violence?
No, I don't think so. I don't think alcohol is the cause for domestic violence. Domestic violence, sociologically also, one has not seen any studies indicating that alcoholism has stopped the number of domestic violence cases. However, alcohol, working with women and working with families to make sure that alcohol addiction is taken away, has strengthened the family system as it is. So it has strengthened the family system in such a way that the resources which were diverted for alcohol was then being used for the betterment of the family. When there were more resources available, the frustration within the family was far less. So those are some of the things which had happened. But to say that prohibition itself will actually decrease the number of cases of domestic violence, neither Bihar nor Gujarat has shown those statistics.
Right, ma'am. We're down to our last two questions. One, the second last question is from Rita Abraham, who says, when you say that a solution is support system, who do you mean by that?
When I talked about various support systems. I talked about support systems which are institutionalized, which are run by the government, like it could be a helpline, it could be various other support systems. I also talked about community-based support systems where that those support systems have to be created by us. For example, speaking within the family, the support system that the family has created. If you have a resident welfare association, if you have a support network within the resident welfare association for women and children, then that's the support system you're creating. So the support, I talked about various different kinds of support systems. So it depends in what context is asking. If you wants to ask it again, I can maybe clarify.
Yeah, maybe Ms. Rita Abraham, if you're still there, if you could type your question more elaborately. Thank you so much. Lastly, we have a question again from Tehmina who asks if you could share some resources available for legal support to women who are being abused.
Okay. Unfortunately, yeah, I was putting them together. Why don't I do this for you? I'll put because I collected a set of phone numbers, which actually I wanted to make a slide out of it, but couldn't do that. Why don't I share that with you, and you can share it with this group, because it's very important, and there are many online support helplines which you can help portals which you can access, as well as helpline numbers. And some of them are not run by the government, some of them are run by NGOs, and then some of them they're very effective. Why don't I put and send it to you? In fact, that was something that I was trying to do in the last minute, but did not happen. There are resources. Whether how effective they are is something for one really has to check out in these, because people are working with much less resources now, but they are very effective in intervening. Rape crisis in Delhi, which I started in 2005, which is still working for Women's Commission. It's supposed to be providing this overall help to women and children. There's a helpline for that. But that's only Delhi. Childline is working. All of us know Childline. Childline working across the country. 1091 is a helpline available. There are many other helplines which are run, and there are also many apps which you can download on your phone for help. I'll put a list of that and share it with Ms. Thomas, and maybe you can share it with others.
Yes, definitely. That would be very helpful, ma'am. And with that, we've come to the end of our questions as well. And I'm so thankful, ma'am, to you for joining us once again. I know you were busy this afternoon, and despite that, you were able to join us. So we're very grateful for that. We're very grateful as well to the participants who joined us and stayed with us till the end. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing all of you again very soon. Thank you. Have a nice evening ahead, everyone.
Thank you, Jemmy. Thank you so much for facilitating this. Thank you.